Thank you very much, Victor. Thank you, Dirk, for inviting me to speak today, and hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk about how DFIs are changing. So I'm going to be very parochial and talk about how CDC is changing, and then in keeping with the theme of the talk, I'm going to say a few words about future research directions. Now, maybe the first thing I should mention is that our name is changing. We're going to become British International Investment. Um, that has raised concerns in some quarters that means we will be more about promoting British interests and less about development. So I want to assure you that whilst everybody loves a win-win, there is nothing in our investment policy or strategy to that effect. Okay, next slide, please, Meng. So we have a new strategy. Here are those three words that our strategy is built around: productive, sustainable, and inclusive. There's nothing particularly original in focusing on what is usually called inclusive sustainable growth. So any novelty that we can lay claim to will consist in how we operationalize these fine words. I'm not going to try and talk about that now, but our strategy document is available on our website, and if you keep an eye on our comms, we're going to have a few more things to say about this coming soon. So what I want to talk about really is just a bit about what stayed the same and what's changed. So how are things changing? So the first thing is that we are increasingly seen as a major part of the UK government's response to climate change and a vehicle for climate investing. So that inevitably pushes us a bit more towards the larger carbon intensive middle income countries where you can make the most difference to carbon emissions by replacing fossil with renewables. Now, our activities are growing, so this doesn't mean we'll be doing less of anything else in absolute terms. It means we will just be doing more with more. And as part of that, we have expanded our geographies. So we will now be doing climate investing in Southeast Asia, when previously we were only Africa and South Asia. Now, when we think about climate, we do use the official MDB climate finance criteria, but I think this is something that is changing for us and changing, I anticipate, for other DFIs. We now carbon footprint all our investments. We are in the future, I think, going to be having to think very carefully about carbon budgeting, and the more you think about that, the more you realize what quite dramatic implications it could have for DFI's activities if we have to demonstrate that our portfolios are on a path to net zero on a particular schedule. And we have an impact scoring tool, and we also consider the environmental aspects of every single investment now, whether it's climate finance or not. So I think that's quite a significant change. Now, we've always, in terms of continuity, of course, we've always thought about what you might call the forward effects of investments from infrastructure and banks, the financial sector. But I think that in the new strategy, we are paying a bit more attention to forward effects more generally from intermediate goods and other important inputs to production. And like everybody else, we're also thinking about innovation, catalyzing markets, and trying to have positive spillovers in that way. For the first time, we're being more explicit about the ownership and management of the businesses that we invest in. Lots of DFIs are signed up to something called the 2X initiative, which pays attention to whether the businesses are owned and managed by women. We are introducing a new initiative which we're calling BOLD, which stands for Black Ownership and Leadership for Development. And we did that in part in response to Black Lives Matter and all the recent events, but also we looked at our portfolio and we realized that really quite a shocking percentage of our investments in Africa were owned by white expatriates. And so we are trying to change that. And lastly, one thing that I think is worth noticing is that we're going to take a slightly different approach towards investing in fragile and conflict-afflicted states. And we're going to be relying more on local partners who are closer, and rather than trying to manage things directly from London, which we think has been less successful. So that's a bit of a change. Next slide, please. So we're short on time, so I won't try and talk about everything on this slide. I was pleased to discover that without conferring with Dirk, there was quite a lot in common between what he had to say and what I'm putting up here. So when it comes to climate investing, I mean, I think that there's the emphasis on mobilizing private capital is starting to have a bit of a reaction, and maybe there are people at SOIS who are part of that, and there are concerns about financialization. The term the Wall Street consensus has been coined. I think that there is more that we could all use to kind of find out both theoretically and empirically about where is private finance and private ownership a good idea, where might public ownership and public finance be a good idea. I think we might want to think about who is going to own all these fossil assets if everybody is busy divesting them to meet their carbon budgets. We also want to be thinking about I mean, adaptation and resilience, everybody is terrifically recognizes the importance, but I think we have a lot to learn about what we can actually invest in. And if we cannot take a demand-led approach and just sort of rely on things coming to us, then how do we create opportunities? So when it comes to mobilization, and this is part actually in response to concerns about what I said about mobilizing private finance for climate, and I think that we all need to learn more about when's it a good use of our money, in some sense paying to induce private co-investment, who benefits from it. Is this about making BlackRock asset management better off, or is this about making African citizens better off, and what's the evidence there, and maybe which are the most effective mechanisms in different circumstances that might solve some of these problems. Now, another thing that's happened with all this emphasis on mobilization is that people have started to notice that maybe it's somewhat disappointing relative to earlier kind of rhetorical aspirations to do with billions and trillions. That conversation very quickly got on to this idea that, well, maybe it's not the lack of money that's the problem, it's the lack of projects. And that in turn has led DFIs towards attempts to create more projects. And that's got a lot to do with what Dirk was saying about coordination and working with policymakers. I think that hope I'm not stealing any of his thunder here, but the IFC has really led the way here with well, as far as I know, putting resources and thought into upstream advisory. CDC is asking itself whether we could be doing more there too, and I think that there's a lot that we need to find out about, what works best, and also what is it realistic to expect, because you can have sort of hype cycles where everybody gets overexcited and then there's a backlash when it didn't meet initial expectations. So I think being realistic is important there. Maybe I'll just try one more thing on this slide and then I better wrap up. And that is about the familiar idea of financing gaps. I would love us to have a bit more than, just surveys where you ask a business, is raising finance a problem? I think that we would like more granular evidence about where in what market segments are there shortages of capital. Longer tenor debt I've put on the slide. I think that a lot of CDC has a very firmly believed, but perhaps under evidenced belief that risk-bearing capital equity is especially important. That's why we've always tried to build the private equity ecosystem in the countries where we invest, and there's lots more we could learn about whether that has had the intended benefits. So some of what I've put on this slide are things for researchers to help us find the answers to. I think some of it is about DFIs experimenting themselves and sort of exploring what they're capable of through what we do. I'm going to stop to try and stay on time. So thank you very much, everybody.